further ado, I am so excited to welcome our first speaker today. She is coming directly from one of my favorite cities in the world, Hong Kong. And I'm so happy to have you here with us, Deepti. And I'm talking about Deepti Kawoor. She is a change and transformation leader, having 2 decades of experience with digital transformation and business excellence teams. She is a certified Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt and Scaled Agile practitioner. She has experience leading transformation teams for leading global banks and business process management solution providers. Her cross-industry leadership and practical experiences spans travel, insurance, and financial services globally. It's a real honor to have you with us, Deepti. Thank you so much for taking your time to share your wisdom and expertise with our global audience today.
Thank you, Jose. And I would want to appreciate you taking the time out and introducing all the participants and facilitating these sessions for the last few days. Show my screen. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed the sessions from various speakers over the last 2 days. Today, I'm going to be sharing my learnings and my experiences on RPA implementations from a very different perspective. That was going to be as a change leader and a transformation leader who's implemented this in a real life environment across complex markets and operations setup in a region, in the Asia Pacific region specifically. So this is going to be some of the learnings and experiences that we've had. Through the course of the session, there would be different aspects that I would cover. So first is, when you're looking at a transformation program, is RPA the right solution for the problem that you're trying to address, is something that we would look at. Then what RPA model to be used. So there are different options that we've seen through the course of the last 2 days of this conference. I could share my experience on the RPA model that we've used. It may not be the most suitable for all areas, but that's one of the options that's available. We will also be looking at an RPA pod structure that we used in the implementations that we've done. And I'd cover some of the things to look out for as a part of the implementation lifecycle. So apart from your usual framework and governance that gets set up as a part of a program, there are some specific things you may want to look out for at the time of an initiation and mobilization phase. Then there are a few things that you want to keep an eye out during the execution phase. And from a post-implementation phase perspective as well, some of the things that are important to note. I'll summarize with some overall observations, and then we move into the Q&A section. Before we get into the details, I want to give a little bit of background around the transformation program that I was leading. It was a holistic program where we were looking at managing end-to-end customer journeys in one of the leading global financial services enterprise. So we weren't only looking at RPA in isolation, but we were looking at the whole technology and digital landscape from a short-term and a medium-term perspective. We were also looking at the location strategy on how we want the teams to be placed, along with different channels of getting business and transactions. So we were looking at call centers, our locations or branches that were present, mobile applications and websites as different channels. So it is a holistic view of the transformation that we were looking at, in which RPA was one of the tools that were available for us. Having said that, let's look at any process that we are looking at. Before we look at a solution or technology to solve that problem, I can take an example of an account opening process. So typically, if you've noticed in an account opening process, you have a lot of forms to be filled in. In the old setup, you have paper forms. There's wet signatures that is required on those forms. Then the customer or the member has to go into a branch to submit the application. These would then get dispatched by a courier to a central processing unit where the documents are manually checked. And if the documents are complete and correct, the account is open for the member and there's manual data entry into the systems that's been made. If there is incomplete documentation, then you ask the member or the customer for the documents that are pending. And then if everything's fine, the account gets open and a welcome letter gets generated, printed and posted. This is a very old way of doing things. It's not very convenient for customers and members because of the travel and the back and forth that's there. It's a very manual process, paper based, and had a very high turnaround time. Now, when we are looking at a medium term or a futuristic view of this process, to make it stay through, frictionless, and faster, there is a holistic view that could be taken, and there are different technology interventions that happen. So there could be considerations of digitally capturing customer information. There could be a possibility of a digital signature being taken. Submissions could be online, either on a website or a mobile app. If there is need for documents to flow for regulatory reasons, physical documents, a workflow implementation can be considered. OCR as a tool is available to check the information, and the entry into the system about customer details could be done by our API as an interface. And then RPA as one of the tools could be implemented for generating the welcome letter. So if you look at this new process that then gets implemented, there is no need for the customer to physically visit the location or branch. It's much faster and with less errors and mistakes. So the key takeaway that I want to share from this slide is, when you're looking at any transformation implementation or a technology intervention, look at the process from an end-to-end perspective in a holistic view, and then choose what are the solutions that you want to implement. The choice of solutions would typically depend on the budgets that you have available, the skill set capability that you have available, the time frame that you have available to implement these solutions, and what's the scope of the implementation. But the very essential part here is to streamline the process, make it efficient, and then look at technology interventions. So again, these are some of the examples of tech interventions. They could be played around with, mixed and matched, and there is AI, ML also that could be implemented. So there's just one view, but RPA plays an important role. And typically we've seen RPA could just be implemented in standalone processes as well. But the most efficiencies that we've seen come out of tech interventions is when you look at it from an end-to-end perspective. So this is one of the learnings that we've had, where we've looked at customer journeys end to end. The next topic that I want to cover that we considered from the program perspective was setting up of the RPA capability. This is one of an important decision that an organization needs to make when we are choosing to implement any technology. So there are different options that are available. There is no right answer here. Again, the decision on what you choose depends on the budgets that are available, the scope of your implementation, the scale at which you want to implement, and the time frame that's available to do this transformation. So there are different models that are available. One is a vendor-based model, which typically what we've observed is very fast to scale up. Resources availability is faster, trained resources who are very familiar with the skill set and the RPA tools that are available. Overall overhead costs of the solution is lower, and it's fast to ramp up. At the same time, it's fast to ramp down. But if you're going to do a multi-year program, then my observations been is it works out a little expensive than an in-house program due to the cost of resourcing. The other example is an in-house capability setup, but the observations that we've had with respect to an in-house capability setup is it takes time to identify resources, get them trained on the tools, and get them certified and make them productive and efficient. Sustenance is a problem because we've seen resources move into other roles or leave the organization. But this again is a common problem with vendor resourcing as well. The benefit is continuity is maintained because you have that capability developed and retained in-house, which is important, as you'll see from a post-implementation perspective. Uh, from a long-term perspective, it works out more cost-effective. If you go through a long-term view, then vendor resourcing is slightly expensive. So it becomes a little cost-effective solution. The other important aspect is it also is a tool that's available for talent retention and certification. It's something that team members aspire for, employees aspire for. And if you have top talent and you want them to diversify their skill set, then this is a good thing to invest in the employees. There is a lot of value on learning of the automation tools in the industry, and these resources come at a premium. So that's a good investment in talent retention for the employees, as an example. For the program that I was working on, the option that we chose was to go in for a hybrid model because it was a large scale program and we wanted to start implementation soon. Identification, training, and certification of resources was taking time. So we worked with a vendor to start with a pilot wave with a few set of projects where we can demonstrate quick wins while we were building up our internal capability. So typically we've seen a hybrid model that has worked best for us. And the other benefit of having a hybrid model is it is easy to ramp up and down the resourcing requirement of a program depending on the volumes of projects that get identified. So typically any transformation program would have peaks and troughs, and having a hybrid model has helped us balance those peaks and troughs with the support of the vendor that we engage with. So that's one of the models that we've chose to go ahead with. It may not be the only solution, but it's something that's worked very well for us. Then the next topic that I want to cover is, sorry, typically how an RPA pod gets set up. So in the program that we've set up, this is the way our pod was configured or managed, and we had multiple such pods set up. Typically, we had one pod working on a project at a given point of time, and once that project got done, they moved on to another project. The composition of our pods was we had a project manager who at a point of time managed 4 to 5 projects because that was the capacity that was made available from a project management perspective. We had an RPA mentor assigned because the configurators were newly trained and they needed support from a technical expertise perspective. So we had an RPA mentor assigned. An RPA mentor at any given point of time used to mentor 7 to 8 projects. Depending on the complexity and the size of the configuration required, you would have 2 or 3 RPA configurators assigned to a project. And because the configurators aren't necessarily subject matter experts on the process, we had a process SME assigned. The process SME was a part of the team which process we are trying to implement an RPA on, and the process SME needn't be a full-time deployed on the spot. They would continue supporting the BAU activities, and they would be spending 20% of the time on the RPA pods. So this is an example of how we had some of our pods set up. And once this project was completed, then they would move on to another project implementation. In terms of some of the things to look out for, so as given with any other transformation program, you've seen there is a framework that is set up and there is regular governance to track on risks, issues, dependencies, and if there are any slippages that are happening. But few of the key things beyond that we recommend we keep an eye on is the process review. It should be end to end, and it has to be streamlined and standardized before you start with RPA discovery work on it. The perception is everyone knows the process and it is standard, but when you actually start documenting it, you realize that there are different versions of process in people's mind. It's important to actually finalize a process before the configuration actually starts on it. The other important aspect is when you have the solution design ready, to have it reviewed with the SMEs, and if you have a compliance and team and a risk team in the organization, then they look at it. But also from an IT architecture perspective and an infosec perspective. The reason why I say this is important is typically organizations will look at something at a medium term, but there's also going to be a long term view from a technology architecture perspective. And understanding how RPA fits in overall technology strategy is very important to get that view and have that reviewed from the IT architecture team. From an execution point of view, everyone has project plans and tracks milestones. Typically, what we've seen with RPA implementations is it runs into delays, especially in COVID times where resource availability becomes tricky. People get pulled into all directions and availability becomes a challenge. So specifically, we've seen projects overrun. It's important to keep an eye on delivery timelines, and if there is delays, look at the causes and mitigate that. We've also seen instances of process changing rapidly due to changing in the regulatory environment in the industry, or due to changes in the way businesses operate. So if there is any changes to the process, we need to go back to the drawing board, look at the solution, and configure some of the bots. So again, this is going to be an important aspect to look out for. It doesn't end with implementation and the bots going live. There's going to be a need for ongoing maintenance and keeping an eye out on downtime. There are times when system upgrades happen and there's some bit of tweaking to the configuration that's required. So while planning for any RPA implementation, it's important to keep an eye out on the post-implementation support, help desk, and management of the activities. There is also a component of BCP that needs to be kept in mind. For any reason, if there is outrage for long periods of time and the process needs to be manually handled, what is the BCP plan? There's sufficient thought needs to be given to that aspect as well. So these are some of the things that we've kept in mind while implementing RPA in our space. Overall, the observation is that it's a good tool to have in the toolkit when you're doing large-scale digital transformation implementations. Depending on the scope, scale, size, it's a good tool to be considered. Typical processes or setups where we've seen RPA being used is instances where there is a high volumes process. So there is similar kind of transactions in high volumes with large activities remaining the same. The process is largely stable and there aren't frequent changes made to it. There is availability or possibility of the RPA bots to connect to different systems in the organization, because there is data sources are different, getting the data, transaction processing, and then posting it onto another system. It is only efficient if the organization allows the bots to talk to different systems within the organization. Some of the organizations which are highly regulated do not allow the bots to do that. It brings down the efficiency of what we are trying to do. So that's an important consideration. Always consider it along with other technology interfaces like digital data capture or OCR, API, or AI and machine learning. In isolation by itself, it can help process a part of a transaction, but there would still be manual interventions required before and after. which may or may not be efficient in a scenario. So that's something that is important to keep in mind. And it's good from a medium term outlook. Typically, a lot of organizations are considering moving on to mobile apps and having more advanced technology being implemented. But if there is an immediate need that needs to be addressed while a long term plan is being worked out, then RPA becomes an important bridge to help meet this. There are also other instances where we've utilized this, where there is volume surges due to COVID times, where certain transactions have seen increase in volumes, and having bots process this round the clock has helped us tremendously. So these are some of the observations and learnings I have had from the last 2 years in the implementations that I have done. I think now we can open it up for Q&A.
Fantastic, Deepti. Thank you so much for that view of a true practitioner's view on how RPA and intelligent automation impacts the other end of the spectrum here, which is the ones who are living with the technology. I always say that, you know, I've had a few different roles in my life, and one is an advisor, another one is an implementer, and it's a lot easier to advise than it is to implement things. And we have to live with the consequences of our advice when we're implementing. So I have some questions that came up during your presentation, and the first question I'm going to relate to you, it has to do with governance. You know, if I am, especially if I'm an organization that's implementing RPA, you know, for the first time, or maybe just scaling up my RPA implementation, how, you know, you talk about a lot of very important things. You talk about understanding the process end to end, having process ownership to a large extent, and then identifying, you know, maybe the high volume, stable processes where intelligent automation makes sense. It gets to a point that, you know, organizations are large and they're disjointed. There are all sorts of people trying to make decisions at different levels of knowledge and understanding. Talk a little bit about governance, and I mean governance not from a bureaucratic standpoint. It's about making decisions in the organization when it comes to RPA. Do you see governance being more centralized, decentralized to be effective? You know, who should be overseeing, you know, the program, if you will? What is your perspective that as a practitioner?
Thanks, Jose. And this is a very pertinent question where it comes to large organization which works in silos across multiple departments. Accountability becomes very important, specifically if things go wrong once a solution is implemented. So I can share what we've done as a part of our program. It was a multi-market program, a regional program, which cut across different functions in a financial services setup, which is a highly regulated industry. So at a program level, we set up a governance which has a typical steering committee where the decision gets made on the solutions. But also important is considering this is a technology interventions, because bot would not work in isolation. There is a production environment, there is a testing environment, development environment that's required through the life cycle, plus post implementation support that's required. So we had a lot of support from our IT organization in ensuring that the solution that we are implementing, the vendor we've chosen or the automation tool we've chosen, is in line with the industry standard. In terms of approvals, it was done as a part of the project governance, where we have a project sponsor who signed off on these solutions. But that was just from a program perspective. When it comes to implementing the solution, if you looked at the account opening process, it would cut across sales, distribution, operations. It cuts across the whole spectrum in an organization. There is a head of each department who would sign it off in each of the market that we've implemented, and not just from an RPA perspective, but from an end-to-end perspective. The complexity it brings in is a matrix organization. So you have market level sign-offs, but you also have functional sign-offs where there would be a product owner, and the product owner would also sign off saying, yes, I agree from this solution at an end-to-end perspective from a medium-term time frame. Maybe when we are looking at a long-term time frame, there's another view that we need to look at.
Yeah, it certainly can be quite complex in as you said, in matrix organizations, and that governance can become essential just so that it doesn't become completely out of control. When it comes to implementation, what have you found to be the most challenging phases? I mean, there is a level of excitement early on about, the possibilities of creating value by implementing these intelligent solutions. But then there is the reality of implementing the solutions, and the complexities of implementing, and the exceptions that you're inevitably going to deal with in the process. Poor understanding of the process sometimes. I mean, there are a lot of difficulties in the implementation, and then there is a next stage, which is the maintenance. After you put this in place, are there business changes that will affect the process that may impact the automation? In your practical experiences across many industries, tell me a little bit about each one of those phases, and or maybe just what has really stood out to you as something that, if you're not experienced, this is something that's going to happen that you don't expect, that you should be aware of. Is there, like, share a little bit of your wisdom about someone who has done it and has suffered the pain of implementing? What have you learned when you actually had to do the implementation?
Yes. Again, this is an important question where change practitioners on ground start implementing things. If it cuts across multiple departments, getting everyone to have a common vision becomes the most challenging part. Everyone has a different view from a future state perspective. Maybe someone wants it to be best in class, a solution which would be everything done on a mobile app instantly without any breakages in a process, but it comes at a cost, and it requires certain timelines, and that capability need to exist in the organization. So while that could be an ideal state where we all want to go to, the fact of the matter is maybe there aren't as much funds available to implement it, and maybe capability is not available. So we would need to take a step-by-step approach. Okay, let's step up to this journey, and then we'll aspire to go to like a best in class journey. So one of the biggest challenges is getting everyone to have a common view of how the future looks like. One, that's important. Second, depending on the complexity of an organization, the amount of approvals it takes to get something proposed and agreed is cumbersome, and for all the right reasons, because we do not want the systems to go down and it impacts customers, and there's media reputational risk, and regulators risk involved there. So the amount of time it takes to get the approvals and to get a solution design signed off takes a lot of time. But the fun part starts when the actual configuration starts, and we start to seeing demos, and things start to work, and the bots being implemented. So what has helped in our cases is pick up small bite-sized manageable projects, show early wins, and get people on to agree to see the benefit, and the light at the end of the tunnel, as we call it. Once people start seeing that, then they start getting motivated and start supporting it. But getting everyone aligned to a common view is the most challenging part that I have observed.
And that's very, very, very helpful. So thank you for that perspective. What about how do you? I'm curious about maintenance of ERP implementations. What have you found to be most challenging about maintaining the systems after they're implemented? Is it pretty easy? Most of them don't need much maintenance, or you find that there's actually quite a bit of work? Because the processes are not static. They are dynamic. They get updated by regulations, by internal directives, and the external environment is also quite volatile. So How does that all impact the RPA implementations that you have done and the maintenance that needs to be done on the systems?
Yes, because we've had quite a few bots being implemented in our setup. We have a dedicated help desk team that's available to provide support in case the bots go down. So there is sufficient investment that's required. So the perception is just start, get the bots up and running and then forget about it. Doesn't work. There is certain investments that have to be kept in mind from a maintenance perspective as well, and it's an ongoing activity. Like with any other IT systems and technology systems, there is the running cost that needs to be factored in. Typically, there is also a component of BCP in case the time required for the systems to go up and running is longer and your processes are time sensitive. You need to have that capability or capacity available for someone to pick up the work and actually do the transactions. So both these aspects need to be kept in mind. With that view, we've seen some of the non-critical or non-time sensitive processes being used to be executed by the bots.
Very well. One final question here that we have in the from the audience, which I think is an interesting one, is the human side of the intelligent automation implementation. What has been the impact in your experience on the professionals who are having the steps automated? Because of course you talk to an RPA provider and they're going to say, oh, it's wonderful because people now are going to have time to do these more creative high level things. That sounds really good, but for someone who's doing that job and all of a sudden comes in a bot that's doing that, whether it's rational or irrational, whether most of the time the full job is not automated, but a portion of it is automated, how it's done can create a lot of fear in the organization, fear of job losses and security. How have you dealt with those type of situations and the human side of implementing intelligent automation?
Yes, this is a very real problem that we have to manage. And typically, as with any change or transformation, it brings in a lot of anxiety with the team members where the change is happening. What has helped us is clear communication and explaining as to what is the scope of the change, why there is a need of that change to happen, and how that will be managed. What has helped us is we keep the teams involved in all the conversations that we do. And if it's a high performing team, we also look at this as a skill enhancement for the team members, because that SME expertise is important in implementation of the RPA. So we look at these team members as potential configurators where they will help us with configuration. So what we've seen past successes in is when we want to develop this capability in-house, the team members have volunteered to upskill themselves. This configuration skill is a niche skill set in the market, and it adds value to a person's resume. So we've seen a lot of team members volunteer and want to get upskilled and certified in the skill set. It also helps with personal learning and development. And once these implementations are over, because we do this across markets, we've used these configurators who've been trained on this new skill set to implement it on similar processes across other markets as well. So it's been a win-win situation for us, where the team members have also gained something out of it, along with digitizing of the processes. And there is a lot of new transactions that keep coming into the organization. So people get redeployed in doing other work, and at the same time upskilling themselves. So it's worked well so far.
Excellent, Deepti. Thank you so much for taking the time. You're in a very different time zone in Hong Kong right there right now, and we appreciate you being up here with us and sharing your wisdom and practical experiences, which are invaluable to our community. So thank you so much for doing that for us and participating in our conference.
Thank you, Jose. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, a true practitioner and leader of implementation leader of RPA in intelligent automation across travel, global insurance, and global financial services. Deepti is a leader who understands the end-to-end processes and the key processes for organizations and how to best approach those processes for intelligent automation. So we're going to be taking a break now. At the top of the hour, we're going to be following up with a speaker who is focused on the last question that I just shared with Deepti, which has to do with the impact of automation on humans. And most specifically, he calls it noble automation, who is actually the title of his most recent book. And I'm talking about our great friend and author, Christopher Hodges. And Christopher is going to be talking about how to use noble automation to improve your business and stop the Great Resignation. And the Great Resignation, as you know, where talent is leaving, is redirecting their life and careers, and that's having a significant impact on organizations. And the leaders are grappling with the challenge of automating while retaining top talent. So sometimes there's a bit of a challenge there when you're automating things that are done by humans, and then the humans may feel like, I'm not as needed in this business anymore because you're automating what I do. So does it have to be that way? What Chris is going to talk about is that it actually doesn't have to be that way. It may actually be the opposite, that we will be more engaged with the right automations going on in our businesses as we engage our workforce intentionally and with a common purpose and goal. So don't miss that session. I'll see you back at the top of the hour with Noble Automation and author Christopher Hodges. Thank you.